Identity, gender, compassion, and hope. Mary Rice Hasson is on Spirit Spire starting right now.
Broadcasting from the Cathedral of the Assumption in Louisville, Kentucky, this is Spirit Spire. And now, here is your host.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Spirit and Spire for another rousing episode. I'm your host today, Erik Huff, and joined with me today are my wonderful co-hosts, Bryan Cain.
Hello, everyone.
John Sohl.
Hi.
And Isaac Fox, unfortunately, wasn't able to be with us today, but we have a wonderful guest, Mary Hasson. Welcome, Mary.
Thank you.
All right. So before we get started here, I want to kind of give some background. Mary's the Senior Fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center in Washington, D.C. Did I get that right?
You did.
Awesome. Well, tell us a little bit about yourself and maybe what those words that I just said mean.
Sure. Well, a good place to begin is professionally, I'm an attorney, but I do not touch a courtroom. I left that behind a long time ago. So I work on public policy, and I've been working on matters related to the church for, a long time, decades now. So I've been at the Ethics and Public Policy Center for about 10 years, and my focus there is really on a new project that I started called the Person and Identity Project, which really is focused on helping promote the truth about the human person, but then also helping faith-based institutions, schools, parishes, dioceses, really address questions around gender ideology and the whole transgender issue. So
Okay. So a lot to do with identity there. So tell me a little bit about your identity, maybe as a wife, a mother, how you balance those roles with a career. Obviously sounds like a big job. So yeah.
Well, I think the most important thing about me is that I am a wife and a mother, and I feel very blessed to be called to that vocation. So I've been married to my husband, Seamus, for, 38 years.
I love the name Seamus, by the way.
It's an Irish name. Well, there's a story behind that, but we don't have time for that. His father's from Ireland, so he goes by Seamus. And we have 7 kids, and we have... most of them are married, but not all. And we now have 3 grandchildren and 1 more on the way.
Wow.
So we're moving to a different phase of life. But to your point, I think it's helpful to think about life as having phases, that you can't do everything all at once. And I think particularly for me as a woman, but I like to share that when I'm talking to young women in particular, people have a lot of talents and a lot of drive, and they're saying, well, how am I going to do it all? I think it's important to realize you don't do it all at once. The question is, what does God want you to do right now?
Amen.
And to be open to that and answer that question.
All right. So that's a good way. That's some good advice to striking a balance. If anyone listening is struggling with that, I know a lot of people, especially in my age range, really struggle with striking those balances between work and family. I know in my own life, that's the case also. All right. So what were you going to say, Bryan?
Well, I was just going to ask if we could, in my mind, identity starts very young. Yeah. I'm the father of 4 young children. The oldest is in kindergarten, and so 6, 4, 2, 0,
busy
basically.
Years.
And busy years. Yeah. And I'm currently trying to help them form an identity and know who they are. And so I was just curious, about where'd your identity start, and what are there experiences that you remember from childhood that helped shape you and give you the identity you have today?
Yeah, sure. I was blessed to grow up in a really strong Catholic family. And I think one of the most important foundational things that you do as a father, I don't know if any of the rest of you have kids, but is to give your kids a sense of rootedness, a sense of significance, because that's a quest of every heart. Why do I matter? Who am I? Why do I matter? And so from the youngest age, when adults, parents, are paying attention to children and are showing them that, okay, I'll put the computer down, I'll put the phone down, I'm going to look you in the eye, I'm going to hear you. It matters to me what's going on in your life, your little 3-year-old life, and your toy broke or whatever. It helps to instill a sense of how significant they are. And the reason why that's important is because what parents do on that order really sets the stage for kids being able to appreciate that God really cares about who they are, and that to God they have an irreplaceable significance. But I think it's parents, that's one of the hardest things, because our own time is divided. We have our own weaknesses and things like that.
That phone is hard to put down at times.
But that's one of the most critical things that we do. And I grew up in a big family, so one of 10.
Okay.
And as a side note, I married an only child, and I was the first one to get married in the family. And my siblings were very skeptical that he was going to sort of
be well adjusted,
pass muster with them.
Right.
So the first time I brought him over to the house, my younger sisters, I'm one of 7 girls and there were 3 boys. So my younger sisters all decided they were going to keep switching names on him all throughout this family dinner and see how he handled it. And he passed. He passed the test. So, but they sort of enjoyed that. But being one of 10, oftentimes people say, oh, you're just sort of part of a crowd. But I never felt like that's how my parents looked at us. We weren't sort of the kids. We were the kids when it's time to get the kids out in the car. But individually, they cared very much about nurturing each of our talents. I've got one brother who's very musical. I'm not, others, most of us were athletic and things like that. But they really looked at us as gifts from God. And I think that's one other sort of significant thing I think about growing up in a large family was my dad was a professor at Notre Dame. And at the time that I was growing up, 70s, early 80s, it was before professors were paid, at least at Notre Dame. They were not paid the salaries they're paid now. Yeah. So being a professor and having 10 kids meant money was tight. Yeah. And yet I just distinctly remember all those years when my mom would be pregnant with like number 6, number 7, number 8, number 9. There was never anything except joy. That they just really had that openness and that generosity of spirit that said, every child's a gift from God. Amen. And we'll work it out. And I think I saw that in my life as a child growing up. I remember times when money was really tight and we'd be praying and a check would come in that my dad was waiting for or something. It just seeing God take care of our needs was really faith building as a child.
And you say that I think the family, just having a big family doesn't mean everyone's going to feel loved and appreciated, but it's really the attitude and open spirit of generosity that your parents exuded that not every parents necessarily understand or appreciate when they have a large family or other things, which I think is maybe why society seems to have this jaded, cynical attitude toward larger families. But when you have witnesses like that, I think that's what will bring renewal to this desire for children that I think we need to reinvigorate within people. Yeah,
I heard a story once about Fulton Sheen, that he was walking in New York and he was passing a hospital. And he just the person he was with recounted this story and said, he just looked so troubled and shook his head, and people thought, oh, he's so concerned about the people who are suffering. And they said, what's on your mind? And he said, so much wasted suffering. And what he meant by that was suffering by itself doesn't make you holy. Yeah. It can make you bitter. It can make you angry. Yeah. So in the same way, growing up in a big family doesn't necessarily make you virtuous. It doesn't necessarily make you more generous. It really depends on continuing to work on your own faults, to continually cooperate with God's grace, to be more generous, to see the sacrifices as, okay, this is where we stretch, this is where we grow. And we all do that unevenly, right? Because we are sinners. We're not perfect. And yet I think that was sort of a key component of growing up in that large family. Everyone sins, right? So there can be friction, there can be all sorts of difficulties, and yet, I'll speak for myself, but I feel confident that my siblings would feel similarly, that, you knew what was right, you knew the right way to treat your siblings, you knew you needed to apologize and forgive, and you knew that ultimately, we were all pulling together to help each other, to live right and to love God. Yeah. So
I was talking to one of our teachers at school this week, actually, and she's the oldest and often, kind of found herself helping out a lot with chores and at times felt like a little mom. And I was just struck that, that could go one of two ways. You could see it as, I started growing in virtue at a very young age, and I knew the virtue of hard work, and I knew how to take care. And that's how this teacher's perspective is. But I could also see it also being equally a cause of someone resenting the fact that they had to do all this work, and that maybe they didn't have as much playtime as the youngest in the family or something like that. So I really think that gratitude would be the difference there. And it sounds like in your family, gratitude was talked about and lived out.
Yeah, and I think also just realizing that, you are where you are. You don't get to choose your circumstances. I was number 2 out of 10. God didn't make me number 10, but you have to just accept where you are and work with your own difficulties, your own situations. And that's true across the board, not just the family that you grow up in, but you can find yourself in positions that you don't expect. So living near Washington, we've been there for, a long time, 35 plus years. We've seen a lot of people rise to that in prominence and status. And we've seen a lot of people lose it. And you quickly realize that people who place their trust in those externals, what people think of me, how much money I have, all those things, it's an unstable basis for having confidence in who you are. And so in the same way, you grow up in whatever family you're growing up in. Maybe it had pluses. Every family has pluses and minuses, but you have to take the good. And then when you raise your own kids and do your own family, you try to take all the good lessons and you acknowledge where your parents might have been weak or you wish they'd done something different, but realize that your own kids are going to say the same thing about you, right? There's things that we're all just not going to do it perfectly, but with God's grace, we do the best we can. So.
Amen.
Are there any God winks from your early years that you remember? We talked a little bit before off camera about making faith our own. Are there some moments that stand out in your life where you made your faith your own, or God kind of invaded in some sense and helped you to be aware of His presence?
So when I was in law school, and like I said, I was blessed to grow up in a strong family, and I didn't go through one of those periods where I rejected my faith and everything. But you still, as you become an adult, you have to make it your own. And I distinctly remember in law school just coming to the realization that I needed to love God as my Father, not just God the Father, and to put in that extra effort to read Scripture and really try to develop that personal relationship with Him, realizing that just as in your relationship with your wife or your families, you're not fungible, right? You can't just sort of swap someone else out to take your place in the relationship. In the same way, for God, we're not fungible. It matters. He's loving us. He's calling us. He wants a relationship with me, with you, with you, with everyone. And so we have to respond in a personal way. And so coming to that realization as a young woman and realizing that, I believed in God. I knew He loved me, but I needed to really connect with Him and love Him more personally. And that's a continuing journey. You don't sort of do it once, just like within any relationship. It's not enough. You proposed, you love your wife, and okay, done with that. No more work on the relationship. That's not how relationships work.
Of course.
So
you grew up, large family. You're in South Bend, right?
Yeah.
Is that where you grew up?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mishawaka, actually.
Mishawaka, okay.
Right
Give
next to South Bend.
Big shout out to Mishawaka on the podcast here. But then, so you said you went away to law school. Where'd you go to law school?
I didn't go that far. I went to Notre Dame.
Notre Dame for law school.
Notre Dame undergrad and Notre Dame law.
Okay.
So,
Okay, very
but
good.
lived on campus because we lived kind of farther out in the country.
Yeah.
So it was a great place to be.
Awesome.
And that's where I met my husband.
Okay, that was like 3 more questions. Right off my list. So, I guess on that note, we can end this segment. So, we go from Mishawaka, right? Did I say
Yes,
it right?
Mishawaka.
Mishawaka. All right.
It's an Indian princess name.
Okay.
I'll have you know.
All right.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to do some research on that. To law school, not too far away, but then to DC. So I want to kind of hear more of that as we get back. So we'll be right back here on Spirit and Spire in just a second. Stay tuned.
Hey everyone, this week's episode is sponsored by Family Renewal Project. FRP is a local theology of the body apostolate in service to the Archdiocese of Louisville. They're dedicated to renewing the culture through the renewal of the family. They have so many amazing things going on, so check them out at familyrenewalproject.com.
All right, welcome back, everybody. We are here with Mary Hasson, and where we left off was we were at Notre Dame and law school, undergrad and law school there. And you said you met your husband at Notre Dame. So can you fill in a little bit of the details there? What's that story?
Sure. So my husband's name is Kevin Hasson. His nickname is Seamus. As I said, that's a longer story, but
Seamus.
He also went to Notre Dame undergrad, but also did a master's in theology and then went to law school. So he's a triple domer for anyone who's a Notre Dame fan. 3 degrees from Notre Dame.
Wow.
But it turns out we had mutual friends when I was an undergrad, but we never met until law school. And I always think, God's providence being what it is, it was just the right time when we met in law school. So we ended up falling in love rather quickly, got married like within a year and a half of meeting. Wow. And I was a year ahead of him in law school just because he had done that master's. And then, so after we got married, I stayed and worked in South Bend for a year. And then he was looking at jobs and decided, we thought, we'll go to Washington. We like politics. We'll go there for a few years. And it turned into a few decades.
Wow.
So, but interestingly, one of the things that drew both of us to Notre Dame Law was that the faculty, well, my dad was on the faculty there, and we knew a lot of the professors.
What did he teach?
He taught constitutional law and jurisprudence.
Okay.
But so many faculty members who just really took their faith seriously and still do. There's still some tremendous professors there. So while my husband was there, he started thinking about wanting to do religious liberty work. And so that was one of the reasons we went to DC. He ended up working for a big law firm, but then got pulled into the Justice Department and working on issues related to religious freedom, and then went to a law firm that had the church as a client and worked there for a number of years, and then started something called the Becket Fund, which is a religious liberty public interest law firm. Cool. And just really felt drawn to serve the Lord in that way. And it's really interesting looking back because neither of us knew what the extent of the challenges would be in terms of religious freedom. Because at the time that he started the Becket Fund, he was most of the challenges were things like, well, should a city have a Christmas display as opposed to just Frosty the Snowman? And now we're talking about questions of whether the state can force a doctor to participate in an abortion or to participate in gender transition surgeries, things like that. Things that are really huge in terms of conscience. So I think it was really a God thing where God just led him and led us in the sense that by that time I practiced for a couple of years and then we had a couple of kids. And so I started staying home and just working on sort of a contract basis for other lawyers, writing briefs and things like that. And then I stopped for a little while just as our family was growing and just focused more on family life, especially since he was traveling a lot. But then started being drawn in as our kids got close to school age, being drawn into working with people who were interested in education. And then I started working more with the church and had kept my law license. But for us, a turning point was my husband was diagnosed with Parkinson's when he was 41.
Wow.
And so we had, all these, at the time we had 6 kids. and I was practicing, but not full time. I was practicing part time. But we looked at this, and we knew that our life was going to take a different trajectory, right? And I, speaking of how you grow up, I really think God prepared me certainly for that, in the sense that I grew up in a family where, okay, you didn't always have what you wanted, but God provides. And my husband has a great faith. So we really just felt like, okay, if this is, he likes to say, he wouldn't have picked this cross. And I don't think any of us pick our particular crosses.
Sure. Right.
But there have been so many blessings in it. So he was able to continue working for a while, but he retired about 10, 12 years ago. And so I went back to work full time because we needed a salary.
Yeah.
So I started, I went to a nonprofit, to the Ethics and Public Policy Center.
Would you mind elaborating a little more on some of the blessings that have come from the suffering of Parkinson's? I think that strikes a lot of people in our culture as a very strange thing to say in some ways. Are there any specific moments or stories that come to mind that
how did you not waste this suffering?
Amen.
Yeah. And that was something that always has been very much on our hearts, because I think one of the gifts of it is that not just for the two of us, for my husband and I, but for our children, I think we're so much more conscious of the sufferings that so many others carry, that there are so many invisible sufferings that people have that you don't even know, and don't know their backstories and don't notice. And I credit my husband for a lot of that, in this sense that as he became more and more disabled, he was the one who would tune into the person that, for example, I'm thinking of a woman who has a handicapped daughter who's now an adult. But I had seen them at Mass for, over a decade. And always said hi, but never got to know them. Yeah. And he was the one who reached out, found her name, and began that conversation. In other words, people who, for better or for worse, sometimes can be invisible to us because we're so busy, right? We're so about whatever we're doing. When you have a disability or you have an illness, time is different because you realize you don't know what's around the next corner. Yeah. And just having also the experience of suffering, I think you become much more attentive to other people's sufferings. And so one of my takeaways over the years, particularly since we've been in the parish where we are for a while and knowing people, is that everyone's carrying something, right? Everyone has brokenness or burdens or sin or difficulties, whatever they may be. And so as a people of God, having that heart for others and that ability to pray for others and to help in those small ways and to be forgiving, to be gracious. If someone's irritating you or whatever, just be kind. You don't know what burdens they're carrying. So I think in terms of blessings, one of the blessings has been, I think God has given us eyes to see people in a more compassionate light, to see the dignity of every person, especially since as a culture, our society does not give much weight and much dignity to those who are not productive or are not achieving or not whatever the particular accolade might be.
My wife works at the Kentucky School for the Blind here in downtown Louisville, and it's been an incredible privilege to watch her work with so many of these kids, and track and field, the cheerleading competitions, the goal ball. I can't remember what I've seen them play beep ball, which is baseball with a beeping ball, so they can hear it. And the incredible things that they do. And I was privileged to go in and speak to them about relationships and dating and boundaries when I was teaching in the schools throughout the area. And I would ask them questions like, what are your goals? Just like I would ask any teenagers. And they would say the same things. They'd give the same answers. And I think, the paradigm is that she taught at the Kentucky School for the Blind, but these kids weren't just suffering from blindness. It was so many other things. And what that really did was help me stop being blind myself to the needs of others on that level. And so that suffering that you speak of that opens your eyes to the sufferings of others, I personally experienced that firsthand when my wife and I started dating, and now we're married, and it's an incredible thing to witness her, because I look at her as a hero in that way, you know.
Yeah, I think it's been good for our kids too. I think they are compassionate in ways that, I mean, who knows how they would be. I would hope they would be compassionate, but I can definitely see that they have hearts. They can see in a way that I look back when I was 22 or 18 or whatever. I don't think I had those eyes for others in the same way. So.
Speaking of your kids, I wanted to go back to what are some lessons of being a mother, and what are some memories of having young kids? Again, as a dad, and I think a good chunk of our audience are young parents. What are some things you've learned over the years that you would say to young Catholic parents?
Someone's always going to spill something, so that's one. You're probably always going to be late. You know what? Each child is an individual, and I think that's one of the things. Having 7, I remember someone said to me once, "Oh, well, you've got 7 kids, so if one goes off track, sort of what difference does it make?" It's like, no, every child is. You care about every child.
You lose track of them, like a collection of marbles or something.
Oh my goodness.
But so appreciating each one and just being curious. We don't know what God has planned for each of our kids, and their talents are going to be so different. And I think we learned a lot in the course of having 7 kids. So we parented differently in some respects, from the oldest to the youngest. But our family dynamic was different too.
Sure.
Both in terms of who was home, whether I was working, all those things. So I think being flexible and being tuned into where you are now. And the other thing I would say is that in terms of time with kids read love, TIME. That I think one of the problems of our culture is that we always want to give people time when we have time, not necessarily when they need it. And so one of the critical things is to realize when your kids need you, they need you. They don't need you to schedule them in some later time. And that may mean you're going to lose sleep. That may mean you have to cancel something. That may mean it changes your whole year because a kid's got a more in-depth problem. But that's human relationships. So having that sense of flexibility, and this is you can't be control freaks, because you're not in control. So just plain simple. But the other thing I would say is when kids are little, especially, there's the gift of joy, because you're seeing everything anew through the eyes of a little kid, and there's so much wonder. I think I appreciated creation and the beauty of God's world in a different way when I started having kids, and I'd stop and you show them a caterpillar, all those things that as an adult you squash the bug. But so there are gifts and wonderful things there. The other thing I would say is don't be afraid to ask advice. I look back and we made plenty of parenting mistakes, but I think one early on was that initially, before we learned, I think we were slow to ask advice. We thought, we can figure it out, or we know what to do, or whatever. And even being second of 10, having your own kids is different, and your own kids they're unlike anyone else. So ask advice, get help. Don't be afraid to let people know you need help, you need support.
Amen. That's beautiful. All right. So I think that wraps it up for this segment, Mary. Thank you. So, we've gotten to Washington, D.C. I don't know if I would call that the promised land now. You stayed there long enough again. But through some great suffering, too. So, So that wraps it up for this segment, and we'll be right back after this short break on Spirit and Spire.
Hey everyone, another sponsor for today's episode is the Cathedral of the Assumption in the heart of downtown Louisville, Kentucky. It is the spiritual center of parish and family life, and is a historic treasure for the Catholic Church in America. Take a tour or consider visiting for Mass. Check them out at cathedraloftheassumption.org.
And we're back with Mary Hasson on Spirit and Spire. We left off Washington, D.C., where you founded the Person and Identity Project. Speak more to that and what that is and what you do there.
Sure. So I'm a senior fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center, and that's a think tank. And we do things too. We don't just think, but
I was going to say, because you hear the term think tank a lot, and could you just say like maybe what that is first?
Sure. No, good
it sounds awesome. Like as someone who doesn't like work very much, who really likes to think.
I like to sit in a tank.
In my mind, it's very easy, but I'm sure it's not.
So what we do is each scholar has specialties. And so the Ethics and Public Policy Center has scholars who are Jewish, Jewish, Christian, and Catholic. And we try to bring the influence of faith, the Judeo-Christian ethics, to bear on public policy. So what does that look like? It means we do a lot of research, we do a lot of writing, we do advising of legislators, state legislators, people in Congress, working with people who are in the nonprofit world who overlap in terms of issues. So my particular area is, because I'm in the Catholic Studies wing of the Ethics and Public Policy Center, I have done a lot of work with the church. So originally on issues like marriage and sexuality and how to prepare people. I work with trying to lead women and mentor young women and help them embrace their vocation to womanhood. And so that was sort of the larger context. But then I got a grant that enabled me to spend a fair amount of time researching issues of coercion on a global scale. And so I was looking at contraception because there's a real coercive element to contraceptive being pushed on people from the developing world. But in the course of it, I also found there was a lot of coercion regarding the whole issue of gender ideology and identities and male-female difference and things like that. So then I did a deeper dive, so to speak, into the question of gender ideology.
Can you go just for a second a little deeper on coercion, because it sounds like you're using it in a fairly technical way. So would that be accurate?
Yeah, economic coercion and cultural coercion, not physical, like someone's got a gun.
So like
to your
we're
head.
taking away funding because of this or that, and
Exactly.
that forces you to comply.
Right, and that is a huge problem. It's something Pope Francis has spoken about, for example, repeatedly since the beginning of his papacy. But you see that because the development world looks at countries that need help because of poverty or lack of development, and they say the people with money have their own agenda, which isn't necessarily aligned with what people need, nor is it necessarily respectful of their cultures. So that's one of the problems in Africa. The church in Africa has really been very vocal in terms of pushing back at some of these agendas that come in with not just the UN, but all of the many NGOs that work with them, and where they're pushing contraception, pushing abortion, pushing comprehensive sex ed, which is very explicit in ways that even if you didn't have a moral problem with it, you would say, this is sort of cultural imperialism. It's really, and that's where the Pope called it ideological colonization. Where
that was the word that came to mind for me, was colonialism or colonization.
And it's seriously a very much of a problem, not just in Africa, but the Caribbean, South and Central America. So that was the larger area that I was interested in. But when I started looking at the issue of gender ideology and seeing it on a global scale, and then looking at what was already going on in the US, I came away saying, oh my gosh, we as a church are not prepared to deal with this. We need to help parents be aware, to help schools understand what these cultural influences are and how it's going to be affecting their students, the teachers they hire, and use this as an opportunity. And I think that's really an important thing. It's not just saying, oh, there's a problem out there in the culture. It's saying, okay, there's a problem, but it's a distortion of the correct understanding of the human person. So what's needed? We need to speak the truth about who we are, what it means to be a human person, what it means to be a man or a woman, and how family fits into that. So it's an opportunity really for the church to bring all of its wisdom and its teaching into not just the cultural conversation, but into the hearts of our own people who are always influenced by the culture. All of us are. So anyway, that's how I got into it.
Yeah.
So what does the project look? So Person and Identity Project. So are there other people working with you? How many people? What does kind of a day at work look like?
Yeah. So I'm blessed that there are two other women in particular who were co-founders with me. Teresa Farnan, who is my sister, who was a seminary professor for many years and now is working exclusively on this project, and Susan Selner Wright, who is at the seminary, St. John Vianney Seminary in Denver. And they both are tremendously talented, faithful women with a lot of insight on this. So we it grew out of some other work some other collaboration with them, and where we saw this need and we said, we've got to do this. There's something we can do. There's something we can do. We can help to put some materials out there, put the teaching of the church out there, find a way to train people. How do we communicate this to bishops so they see the problem, so that they in turn will help educate their priests and things like that. And you might say, well, wait a minute, don't people in the church already know all this?
Yeah.
But I mean, the truth is, yes, you go through seminary and you learn Christian anthropology, you learn the teachings of the church, but now you have to understand what you're seeing in the culture and how that's challenging those teachings and what effect that's having on all the people who are sitting in your pews.
As well as how to speak to it.
Well, and listening to this podcast. So maybe this is a good time to kind of define some of these things that we're talking about. And so, maybe we could just start with with the human person. I mean, why does any of this matter anyway? A child of God is an identity that the Catholic Church offers. I would think that maybe it starts there, but help us understand. Why are you so passionate about identity and who man is? We have an episode that came out just before yours called Who Man Is. And so we talked a little bit about it, but how would you define it?
So here's the thing. Every person has it built into them to figure out, who am I? And it's a task, particularly in adolescence. Now, the culture used to take certain things off the table. We didn't question whether we were male or female. So when I was growing up, the question of who am I was, how am I alike or different from my siblings? How am I going to imagine my life and how I live out my talents and God's call in a way that's similar to or different from my parents or people I admire? So it's working out your future, but it was rooted in a truth that we already knew. Right? You knew where you came from, and you knew the truth about being created by God, male or female. But what's happening today is people have that very same yearning, because you have to figure out who you are in order to be able to answer the other key questions.
But without the certainty.
Without the certainty, it's completely destabilized. So if you don't know who you are, you can't answer the question of, what's the meaning of my life? How should I live? Because all of that flows from understanding who you are. So when the culture says everything's up for grabs, you get to self-define who you are, because we're throwing God out. There is no creator. You are a self-creator. You define for yourself. It makes things very unstable. And so, not surprisingly, we're seeing kids being very destabilized by this.
I would think that, we've talked about relativism on this show before, and this idea that we kind of make our own truth. Historically, that was, I would think more in the philosophical realm. But, Pope Benedict talked about the dictatorship of relativism. It was like, we all make our own truth, but you need to go along with mine.
Right.
But that's almost like it's expanded and gone beyond philosophy at this point, to where even the physical nature of things, of our bodies, has been called into question. Like everything's up for grabs.
Right.
Is that where that starts? I mean, what?
it really goes back to the rejection of God. And that's something that Pope Benedict spoke about. He said, when you reject the maker, you will also lose sight of the image of God in man. And the dignity of the person will no longer be respected. And that's what we're seeing. So you might wonder, as you hear the stories in the media about people undergoing all these gender transition procedures, right? They have a healthy body to start with, and all of a sudden they're getting their breasts cut off and their ovaries removed, and on and on. And you think, why would someone do that? It's degrading. It harms the human person. But if you no longer have a vision of what it means to be a human, the fact that we receive our identity as male or female as a gift from God, and you think, oh, this is all up to me, I get to decide anything. We become sort of like Adam and Eve back in the garden, thinking we can be like God. We can write our own future, write our own destiny. But ultimately it's a rejection of God and a rejection of the idea that we're called to eternal life. There's a purpose to our body. There's a purpose to creation. When you throw all of that out and it's all up for grabs, well, you can decide how to live, how to redesign yourself. There's no guarantee of good results. And in fact, the results are not good.
It sounds to me like you are on the front lines of helping to rebuild or completely replace this fallen culture with the authentic truth, goodness, and beauty of what it actually means to be a human person. Because so many people, I feel like they have been sucked in by this social media technological revolution in a way that they didn't mean to. They didn't know.
Right.
You couldn't have foreseen all of the things that would be offered to us at the click of a button that can utterly transform your worldview and isolate you from your own family and your own culture and your own faith, to where you don't have a faith, you don't have a culture, you don't have a family, and you feel in a void.
I think to speak to that too, just in my personal experience and knowing people who struggle with these things, that is one of the first things that I notice is that the first thing that goes wrong is that now they're completely detached from their family. Even on this issue. So they could even have a faithful Christian family, but they definitely have drawn a line in the sand, and there is a detachment first before any of the other stuff. I would say even the dysphoria and stuff and just from experience that I've seen, there is a complete cutoff from their family, everything that they were raised to believe, everything that their family says at this point is wrong. So I know we've been talking a lot about family, but can you kind of speak to that and maybe it is the internet or whatever's driving that engine?
No, I think it's a really good observation. And I think one of the things that I've found in working on this issue for a while and knowing many families who've either people personally who've gone through this kind of identity issue, or they love someone who has gone through it or is going through it, is that oftentimes people do not see that gender ideology is utterly incompatible with Christian anthropology, the vision of the person. It's two completely different visions of the person, but they don't see that at the outset.
One thing I wanted to say before one thing I learned from you is that gender ideology, you first heard that from Pope Francis. Is that
he was
right?
the one who
or
sort of popularized it. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, so it was in a document. That was something that as I was researching,
he recognized the trend that was taking place and named it.
Yes. Pope Benedict also spoke of sort of the theory of gender. So it was on the radar because in Europe there was a lot more sort of action around that before it came over to the U.S. But the U.S. is now the major purveyor of just pushing it through the culture into these other cultures. But in terms of family, I think people oftentimes don't realize that this is such a harmful path and that it's completely incompatible with Christian anthropology because it involves a rejection of the Creator. They're not deliberately saying, oh, I'm going to reject God, but that's where you end up. That's where you end up. In my experience anyway, people oftentimes, they'll encounter someone or have someone they love who's become confused about this and they want to be compassionate. And so they think being compassionate means how can I validate what they're feeling? How can I support them in what seems to be important to them? And yet you have to realize we don't validate people's false beliefs when we know they're harmful. And so if you have someone who is suicidal and they believe they're worthless and they believe their life has no meaning and everyone else would be better off if they were dead.
You wouldn't want to validate that.
You don't validate that because it's not true.
Yeah.
And it's not only not true, but to validate that is going to encourage them to go down a harmful path. So it's the same thing here, that when someone believes that somehow they're born in the wrong body, which is incoherent. You cannot be born in the wrong body because all your cells are the same. You're either male or female. And so you can't be born in the wrong body. But if you've got these feelings that don't match with your body, it's like, okay, that's what you're struggling with. But what's the proper response to that? When we have someone who's anorexic and their feelings don't match the reality of their body, we don't say, okay, what do you feel like doing to make you feel better? Well, they want to diet, they want to lose more weight, they want to starve themselves. We don't validate that. We don't encourage that because that's harmful to the person. So in the same way, no one can change sex. And that's an important thing. Out there, sort of in the culture, there's a lot of teenagers and young adults I encounter, they sort of in a very fuzzy way think, oh yeah, if I'm a female, I can become a man. No, you can't. No, you can't. And I'll tell you as a lawyer, I look at the informed consent documents on the gender clinics. They don't promise to change anyone's sex because they can't. Yeah. All they promise is that they'll give you hormones or surgery to masculinize or feminize your body.
They don't even write that in to the informed
because
consent.
they can't. Their lawyers aren't going to let them do that because it's not true. All you can do is change the appearance and destroy the natural function. That's what you're doing when someone goes down the path of a gender transition. So it takes someone who has a healthy body and you introduce these high levels of hormones that make things out of order in their own body. Yes, it'll produce some of the secondary sex characteristics, but it's not changing their cells. It doesn't change any of their reproductive apparatus. You can get your own genitals or reproductive organs removed, but the facsimiles that they attach don't work. It's appearance only. So what are you doing here? You know, when someone has this false belief that they can truly become someone that they can't, how is that compassionate to validate that and further their path in a way that's just going to harm them physically, and ultimately they have to come back to the truth about who they are. And
I'd say from just my personal experience, and I think there might have been some more naivete earlier on. When I was in high school, this is all, I'd say, pretty new stuff. And then moving into college, I know people who have struggled that were older than I am, that I looked up to, that have gone through this sort of thing. And then I definitely have friends that are younger than me who probably looked up to me and probably looked towards me to give them an example, and I may have failed them in perhaps that overly compassionate drive, and just thinking that towing that line when you have the individual in front of you who thinks, okay, and you talked about the feeling of versus the reality, but they say, I have this feeling of that I'm in the wrong body, and if I don't do this, I mean, I know one young person who had worked for me that had committed suicide, due to this issue, and when you look at the rates, I mean, high suicide rates is what I've seen. As you mentioned, suicide too. So how do you address it? You have on one hand, if I address it and I'm overly compassionate, I'm pushing them towards something that isn't reality, something that could mutilate them, that could harm them for the rest of their life, something that they could come to regret. And then also, I really have seen it the other way too, the exact opposite argument of unless I do this thing, I'll never be in the right body. And if I don't do it while I'm young, if I don't do it soon enough, I'll be in the wrong body if I don't have this. So when you have the person in front of you, I guess, how can someone, especially a Catholic individual, respond to a loved one dealing with this, with that dichotomy of two extremes?
Yeah, so I'd caution you a little bit in this sense. It's not compassionate. You said, you were maybe too compassionate. It's a misplaced compassion.
Misplaced compassion.
It's a false compassion.
Fair
in other
enough.
words, your intention is really good.
Yeah.
But just as it's not helpful to the person who's suicidal to say, okay, go ahead. I'll validate your feelings. Go ahead. It's not true compassion to encourage someone to do something that's harmful.
Sure.
And the other side of that you brought up, people who've committed suicide. So here's what the data show is that people who tend to have these difficulties with identity also have high rates of mental health issues pre-existing. So in clinical samples, you get rates as high as 88% of people who experience gender dysphoria, this disconnect between their identity and their body, 88% who will have pre-existing mental health issues, depression, anxiety. They may be on the autism spectrum, which also has a higher rate of suicide. They may have ADHD. They may have body issues. Again, all these things themselves carry higher rates of suicide risk. So that's one thing to realize. You have someone who is hurting. You have someone who's troubled. And yet this is proposed as a solution.
Yeah.
And in the long term, it's not. Because what the long-term data shows is that people commit suicide at all different phases of transition. Because if you're not dealing with the underlying wounds, if you're not helping them discover really what's the source of that pain, then it gets
That's not even
masked.
related to gender or sex.
Right.
In
And
any
typically
way.
it's not, because the other thing that comes out in the research is there's a high rate of people, especially for young people, but it holds true for adults who are diagnosed with gender dysphoria, but who have backgrounds with attachment disorders. In other words, something went wrong in their childhood. And it may not be someone's fault. It may not be because they have a rejecting parent. It could be they lost someone they loved. A parent died, a grandparent, and they've got this unresolved grief and loss and this sense of abandonment and insecurity, and all those things can be precipitators. So realize you have a hurting population. So then the question is it really helpful? Are you really reducing their suicide risk by encouraging them down this path? Sure. And the data says no, because what happens is you initially will have what they call a gender euphoria, a feeling of, okay, I'm finally on my way. Right, I can be recognized as, if I feel like a male, people are now seeing the stubble and they're recognizing me as a male. It doesn't last. It doesn't last. So the best data we have comes from Europe. Because of socialized medicine, they keep better track than we do. Here it's kind of like the Wild West. Gender surgeons are not reporting, and they oftentimes don't do follow-up. They may remove someone's organs and then sayonara, see it, and they don't know what happens. But the long-term data shows that at year 10 and beyond, the mental health drops, the happiness factor drops, the quality of life drops. But even before that, the average time to suicide for those who do commit suicide, who are experiencing gender dysphoria or identity issues, the average time is 6 years after they start transition. Wow. So if transition
where they commit suicide.
Where they commit suicide. And it's tragic. The loss of any life is tragic. But what's playing in here is that there's a false belief, there's a hope, there's an expectation that I see it as cruel. If you know something's is only going to cause someone harm, why are you promising them it's going to do something it can never do?
Yeah.
They can never change sex. You can never, the data, you just are not solving the problem.
I would think, I know that there are, huge communities of young people online that you've got someone maybe with mental illness and a community on Discord or something will say, which is a funny name in this context, but they'll say, oh, maybe you have gender issues and everything would be fine if you took these steps. As you say that, I'm thinking probably a lot of those people who are saying you should do this are still very early in that process.
Or they're people who transitioned later in life and they're projecting backwards and they're unhappy, even though they've transitioned. And they're saying, my problems would be solved if I had transitioned earlier. So they make it their sort of life's work to encourage young people who are experiencing this kind of confusion to go down this path. But really what we see is you have vulnerable people who particularly oftentimes feel like they don't fit in, they're lonely, they find an online community, and the online community just encourages this. Whatever your problems are, it's probably because you're trans. And so there are quizzes.
And that puts you in dichotomy against your parents, your family.
Exactly.
And all of a sudden the
alienation.
The people who really love you and are trying to help you as best they can, maybe don't have the vocabulary, all of a sudden they're opposed to what has become the clear solution to this or something like that.
I had a young person in the youth ministry I worked with before I transitioned to Family Renewal Project, and we were speaking about these. I was shown a video of one of the national speakers in a program we had, and afterward she didn't seem to understand what he was saying, and it turned out that her uncle had transitioned to her aunt. Her father didn't appreciate his brother becoming a woman and didn't know how to handle that, and it became so intense, so out of hand, that one day she heard a gunshot in her own home and saw the body. And it was, I did not expect that story when I was just showing a Theology of the Body for Teens like program video series. And her response was so visceral, so painful. I've never forgotten it, but I'm like, and this is why she advocates and believes that, well, the reason that her uncle did this is because he wasn't accepted for who he really was.
It just isn't true.
Gosh,
that's how they feel.
How do you speak? How do you help someone see that? That's so. Oh.
And like I said, there's multiple studies. The mental health doesn't improve, and so really the way to look at that is what you've done is you've put a Band-Aid on a very deep wound, and a Band-Aid's not going to solve it.
No.
And so it does a disservice to someone. But this young woman's experience, unfortunately, is typical in this sense that when someone identifies as transgender, it changes all the relationships, right? Someone who is a boy who now says he's a girl, well, he wants to be your daughter instead of your son. He wants to be your sister instead of your brother, your niece instead of your It changes everything. And that's not fair to other people either. So there's a lot of pain around this issue, regardless of which path you go down. And I think the church is wise. It says we have to relate to other people in terms of the truth about who we are. And fundamentally, it's not, truth and charity are the same because they're both God. God is truth and God is love.
How do you answer that argument, though, that if the whole society was more accepting, these issues would go away? That's a hard one to.
No, it's not hard, and here's why. It sounds nice, but it has not proven true. Because when you look, for example, at the Scandinavian countries, which are far more liberal and far more sort of accepting on these issues, you have the very same high rates of suicide after that initial honeymoon period, after transition. It's not a question of not being accepted. It's a question of the reality that you can't change sex. But what you're doing is you're taking someone with a healthy body, but whose mind and emotions are troubled. And now you're introducing medicines and surgery that are going to make their body no longer healthy and that can cause additional problems, which exacerbates everything. And you lie to them too. For example, a male who transitions, and changes appearance to appear more like a female. Guys are not going to want to date him because they want to date a woman. They want to date someone who is capable of having marital intercourse and having children, God willing. Yeah. So all of a sudden, this person's relationship pool narrows. There's a lot of loneliness, but nobody's telling them that.
Right.
Nobody's telling them that. It's really holding out a mirage that they can somehow be like God, and God must have made a mistake giving them this body. So I should really change it. You know what? Honestly, you love the person in front of you, but you have to love people enough to say, there's a truth here, and I'm drawing boundaries. I will love you, I will stand by you, but I'm not going to facilitate something I know is harmful, because that's what we do in other areas of our lives. It's just because this has become so politicized, we feel like, oh, we can't draw those boundaries.
Well, to the point where people don't even feel like they can talk about it. That we
Yeah.
can't even have this conversation because it would be seen as combative, divisive, bigoted, whatever word we want to associate with it. We can't even speak about it. And when you choose not to talk about it, all you're doing is permitting unhealthy, violent, and evil situations to perpetuate and get worse.
Yeah, because that silence, the vacuum gets filled by the culture. And the one positive thing I think that can be helpful for people to know is that there is a growing number of young people in their late teens, early 20s, who've gone down this transition path and who after 4 or 5 years realize it just wasn't true.
Yeah.
I ended up worse off, and are speaking out. And they're
on YouTube, I think it's called like detransition stories or
Detransitioners,
something.
yep.
I've seen.
Yes.
There's many testimonies on YouTube that are very powerful.
And there's a number of documentaries.
That gives me hope.
Yeah, and they're tremendously powerful because they're speaking from their experience. They know what it feels like to be 12 and to feel like your body's all wrong and you don't fit in, and there must be a better solution than growing up to be a woman or a man. They understand that, and yet they also know the experience of being lied to and their parents being manipulated by that threat of suicide. Oh, they're going to commit suicide if you do this. It's like, no, you have a vulnerable kid. You need to keep this kid safe, but this is not a solution. So their testimony is tremendously powerful.
And it is concluding with them finding their identity and being at peace. And that's one of the things that makes it so powerful. It's like, and now I actually know who I am. And yes, I regret this. And and some of them are painful. But there is also a lot of hope too, because they're like, I finally know who I am really. And so there's some beauty there too.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think that's a lot for this segment. Heavy to say the least. I do want to say that if anybody out there is watching and they want to reach out, spiritinspire@gmail.com or spiritinspire@aol.com for all you millennials out there.
Good old AOL.
Yeah.
Still around.
We definitely want to.
We're the only ones with an email.
Yeah, we're the only ones with an AOL
Just saying, I
account.
didn't know it was still around.
And we will be back with Mary in just a bit. Hey everyone, here at Spirit Inspire, we want to serve our community by highlighting God's work in our parishes, schools, and apostolates. We hope to bring renewal and unity between all those in the body of Christ. If you would like a shout out in the next episode of Spirit Inspire, go to spiritinspire.com or email us at spiritinspire@gmail.com. Thanks and God bless. And we're back on Spirit Inspire with Mary Hasson. John, I think
Is it Hassan or Hassan?
Hasson.
Hassan. You said Hassan last time.
I think it was 2 times ago.
Maybe it was. Maybe
The truth remains.
Mary Hassan.
I was going to tell Eric to do another roll into one of the segments, but now he has to keep it because he made fun of him. So.
I was going to do it differently every take, but then that would be against reality too. So, and truth.
And that's not her identity.
Yeah.
Right.
My maiden name was Rice. No one ever got that wrong.
No Riche or anything like that. All right. So, John, what was your question?
Sure. Thank you so much for being here, Mary. It's a privilege to have you, and this has been a very lively and very intense conversation. And I think it's important that we kind of move toward a more hopeful way of looking at this issue and ourselves as people. One thing that I have grown up with, growing up here in Louisville, born and raised Catholic, went to a small Catholic school, small Catholic church, small Catholic high school, came back and worked in youth ministry, and I've loved every bit of it. But what I've witnessed in the Archdiocese of Louisville specifically, in the Catholic world, is there's a strong sense of a Catholic identity. Right? We're a big city with a small town feel. Everybody knows each other. And we have that strong sense of belonging that, I went to Catholic grade school, Catholic high school, went to this Catholic church. But I don't know if we move beyond that Catholic identity in a way that fully brings us fully alive. We really look forward to, both as men and as women, right? And so I think this particular phrase from John Paul II could maybe help people begin that journey from their identity to their purpose, as well as a healthy lifestyle, both when it comes to sexuality and gender, but also going to church, loving your family, just being a healthy, holistic human person. And so this is the phrase. What do you think when you hear the phrase from John Paul II, feminine genius? And how would you define it? What insights might we gain from a phrase like that concerning womanhood and femininity?
Yeah, it's actually a controversial phrase.
I bet.
Some women don't like it. They feel like is it patronizing, because why are you not talking about masculine genius?
Well, for the record, we're asking you because
no.
you talk about it a lot.
No, and I think it is true. But I think it also is true that there is a masculine genius, and the way to think of the person is relational, because
That makes me feel good.
there you go.
There's hope for you yet.
Not all of us sitting here.
Almost hopeful.
No, Mary Hasson over there.
But here's the insight that JP2 was getting at. And his insight is one that we know experientially, and that's that women have an attentiveness to the person. JP2 called it women seeing others with the eyes of the heart. And I think that's a beautiful way to think about it. And so what does that mean? What's the impact of that? He talked about how it's important for women to be in all aspects of culture, because we bring that sensitivity towards the person. Whereas masculine genius, there is one, but you can see in societies that are sort of very masculine without the complementarity of femininity, is that you can have almost a utilitarianism. You can have a goal direction that can trample on the sensitivities and the needs of the human person. So one of the things that John Paul II was observing was that when you have that dynamic, that male-female complementarity, and women are being women and men are being men, part of what women bring to that equation, with all our talents, whether you're an engineer or a lawyer or a yoga instructor or whatever it might be, whatever your gifts are, women tend to bring that added attentiveness to the person, to humanize the culture. So he talks about women having an important mission in society. So he talks about women bearing witness to the truth of marriage and the family, but also having responsibility for shaping the moral dimension of culture. And so I look at the culture, and I think one of the problems that we've seen is that while there were a lot of good things about feminism, making sure that women had opportunities to get an education and be full participants in the culture and the wider world, there was an edge with radical feminism and Marxist feminism that diminished the idea of the person and diminished what it meant to be a woman. And so we sort of missed the opportunity that even as women were getting more opportunities in the secular world, to really do what we're called to do, which is shape the moral dimension of culture. You look at where the moral dimension of culture is, it's not in a good place.
Right.
And yet, one of the things I think has been tremendously interesting over the past year and a half has been sort of the uprising of moms in terms of schools, as they looked at what their kids were suffering, and both with COVID, but then what their kids are being exposed to. And so all of a sudden, you have these moms who are stepping forward and saying, wait a minute, this is not right. This is not good and healthy, and we have a voice here. And so I think just across all areas of the culture, I think that's what women do. We're
It's really
attentive to the person.
interesting, because as I'm thinking about sort of experts I know on gender ideology and some of these issues, a lot of them are women. And then I'm also thinking that I'm pretty sure, and I'm sure you know, that whether a lot of the kids that struggle with gender dysphoria, isn't it a prevalence of girls?
Yeah, now it is. It
okay.
used to be a tiny percent of the population, like a fraction of a percent, and that was usually adult males or very young children who were mostly males. But what we've seen with this sort of latest phenomenon is it's 2 to 1 females to males. You still have males who are struggling with it. But it's a hard time to be a woman in our culture. You know, there is this over-sexualization. There's the emphasis on body. And at the same time, a diminishing. What does it mean to be a woman? Are you supposed to be just like a man? And
well, I think we've gotten to a point where we think that men and women are in competition with one another in a way where we have to eliminate the sexual difference as if it doesn't mean anything. Whereas I think we need to seek complementarity so that we can see that men and women are equal but different, just like 2 plus 2 equals 3 plus 1, right? They look and operate differently, but there's this beauty within both.
So I'll give you an example of how that plays out in society. So we've seen after the Dobbs decision, you know, where the court struck down Roe v. Wade, we saw all these corporations saying, we're going to pay for women's abortions. We're going to pay their travel expenses so they can go to a state where abortion is still legal. They're not offering to do the same for their childbirth and child care expenses. So what they're doing is they're trying to treat women like the unencumbered male worker. In other words, you can have sex, but you know, we're going to disregard the needs of your body for pregnancy or for nursing or for, you know, those early months of recovering. We're going to pretend you are just like men, and we're going to incentivize that. We're going to help you get rid of your children because we're not valuing you as females. We're not looking and saying, yeah, males and females are different. So when a woman has a baby, she needs accommodations in order to be able to get back on her feet and to bond with the baby in a way that's different from men. But for corporate America, it's all about having worker cogs, and they all should be identical, which means on the male model. That's an undervaluing of women. So this abortion mindedness in the corporate culture is really just a diminishing of the value of women.
So where do you find hope?
So I find hope in the fact that we can have conversations like this. I find hope in the one-on-one relationships. I've seen tremendous miracles in people's lives, particularly in the area of, say, gender ideology, or people who've gotten sort of caught up, and there's so much suffering in the families, and yet I have seen miracles happen with people coming to the reality, the truth about who they are, family relationships being healed, and even apart from this whole idea of gender ideology, you know, the truth is the truth, and God is in charge in a sense, but he loves everyone. So when we're made for this moment, and right now people need to hear the truth. And so if all of this consternation and turmoil gives us an opportunity to tell people how loved they are and how valuable they are, just as God made them, that's a tremendous thing. And that's part of sharing the gospel. So.
You've spoken about the equality of brokenness. Could you maybe speak to that a bit and see what kind of healing from Christ that would bring us?
Yeah, so I think everyone needs to, we tend to easily idealize people instead of realizing every one of us, we're not God. We all sin. We have brokenness, we have weakness, we have relationships that need healing, and that's part of being human. But God doesn't abandon us. He doesn't leave us sort of struggling on our own with all those things. That's the power of grace. That's the power of the sacraments. That's why it makes a difference to be Catholic. You know, I can go to Mass and I receive the Lord, and it's like, I am carrying the Lord, and Lord, you know, help me to be you in my relationships with others. That's a tremendous, tremendous gift. So if there's anything that can sort of move us beyond just being culturally Catholic, it's really embracing that truth and saying, okay, God's really there, and he wants a relationship with me. I think I need to respond. I think it's time. So.
Well, I think that's a good place to end it. Mary, thank you so much for being on. And you heard it here first, folks. Well, maybe not first. You heard it here, folks. God loves you, and he has an awesome plan for your life. Thanks, and we'll see you next time on Spirit and Spire.